On December 5, 1945, 5 Navy bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale in perfect weather. None of them would ever return. Flight 19 was a routine training mission. 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers, fully fueled, piloted by experienced airmen. Their flight plan was simple. Head east for 56 miles, drop some practice bombs on a target, then turn north and return home. A milk run, something you could do in your sleep. But something went catastrophically wrong. At 2:10 p.m., the lead pilot, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, radioed back to the airfield. His voice carried an edge of confusion. "I don't know where we are," he said. "We must have taken a wrong turn after the target." This was strange. Taylor had flown this exact route dozens of times. He knew these waters like the back of his hand, but something had disoriented him. The compass wasn't working right. The sun seemed wrong. Everything felt off. As the minutes dragged on, Taylor's transmissions grew increasingly desperate. "We're lost," he admitted. "I'm sure we're in the Florida Keys, but I don't know how to find the field," the other pilots chimed in. They too were confused. Their instruments were malfunctioning. They couldn't see land. They were flying through a haze they couldn't explain. The tower tried everything. They told Taylor to fly west toward the mainland, but Taylor was convinced they were already over the mainland. He thought flying west would take them out over the ocean, so he refused. "We can't find the west," Taylor said, his voice crackling with static. "Everything is wrong." An hour passed, then 2. The sun was setting. Fuel was running low. By 4 p.m., Taylor made a final transmission. His words would haunt aviation history forever. "We're heading northeast," he said. "We're completely lost." That was the last anyone ever heard from Flight 19. The Navy immediately launched a massive search and rescue operation. They sent out a Martin Mariner flying boat with 13 crew members to hunt for the missing bombers. That rescue plane vanished too. No wreckage, no bodies, no explanation. Over the following days, the Navy searched 250,000 square miles of ocean. They found nothing, not a single piece of debris, not one oil slick. It was as if 5 fully loaded aircraft and their crews had simply ceased to exist. The official Navy report concluded that Flight 19 had run out of fuel and ditched in the Atlantic. Case closed. But the facts didn't add up. Those planes had enough fuel to stay airborne for hours after their last transmission. Some of the debris should have washed ashore eventually. Some trace should have remained. Decades later, alternative theories emerged. Some claimed the planes had entered some kind of electromagnetic anomaly, a phenomenon that would later become known as part of the Bermuda Triangle legend. Others suggested secret military experiments had gone wrong. A few even proposed something more fantastical, that the planes had somehow entered a temporal distortion and been transported to another time entirely. The truth is, we don't know what happened to Flight 19. We never will. Those 5 planes and their crews simply vanished into history, leaving behind only questions and a mystery that refuses to be solved. On Christmas Eve 1945, 5 children vanished without a single trace from a locked house, and the investigation that followed revealed something far more disturbing than a simple kidnapping. It was late evening in Fayetteville, West Virginia, when the Sodder family settled in for the night. George and Jenny Sodder, along with their 10 children, were preparing for Christmas. The house was warm, the doors were locked, and everything seemed peaceful. But around midnight, Jenny smelled smoke. She woke George immediately. They rushed downstairs and found the living room engulfed in flames. In a panic, George managed to get 5 of his children out safely through the windows. But 5 others, Maurice, age 14, Betty, 12, Classy, 10, Jenny, 8, and little Billy, only 4, were still upstairs in their beds. The parents called for help, but something strange happened. The phone lines were dead. Every single line was cut. George ran outside to find neighbors and called a fire department. When firefighters finally arrived, the house was already consumed by the inferno. The entire structure collapsed into ash. What happened next defied explanations. The next morning, when investigators sifted through the rubble, they found something that shouldn't have been possible. The cast iron stove remained intact in the center of the house, barely damaged. Yet the intensity of the fire was supposedly hot enough to completely incinerate 5 children. But there were no bones, no teeth, no remains of any kind in them. The official investigation concluded that the 5 children had burned to death in the fire. Case closed. But George and Jenny Sodder knew something was terribly wrong. George began his own investigation, and what he uncovered suggested a far darker possibility. He discovered that the power lines to their house had been deliberately severed. The phone lines had been cut, and most disturbing, the night before the fire, there had been a heated argument between George and a traveling salesman. George had refused to allow a group of transient workers to stay on his property. Witnesses claimed the man had muttered a threat: "Your house will burn and your children will be destroyed." But it gets worse. 3 years after the fire, George received a photograph in the mail. It showed a young boy who looked remarkably like his missing son Billy, who would have been 7 years old by then. The photograph came with no return address, no explanation, just an image of a child that could have been his son, older than when he disappeared. Over the following years, the Sodders received multiple unconfirmed sightings. Someone claimed to have seen Maurice working on a farm in Louisiana. Another person reported seeing one of the girls in Kentucky. But each lead went nowhere. Each potential witness disappeared or recanted. The official story remained. 5 children died in the fire. No investigation, no justice, no answers. But George Sodder spent the rest of his life convinced his children had been kidnapped and that someone wanted him to believe they were dead. The deliberate cutting of power and phone lines, the mysteriously intact stove, the complete absence of remains, the threatening warning, the mysterious photograph. To this day, the disappearance of the 5 Sodder children remains one of the most unsettling cases in American history. Were they really victims of a fire, Or were they taken that night by someone determined to make their parents suffer? 60 years later, George Sodder died, never knowing the truth, and 5 children remained missing, their fate sealed by a mystery that was never solved.
Wind, no reason whatsoever for concern. They told the local innkeeper they'd be back by evening. They never came back. Onies. What makes this case different, what makes it genuinely disturbing, is that when search parties scoured that mountain just hours later, they found absolutely nothing. No abandoned gear, no torn clothing caught on branches, no blood, no bodies. It was as if the mountain had swallowed them whole. The search lasted for weeks. Dozens of volunteers combed every inch of that terrain. They found a hiking boot belonging to Lennox near a steep gorge, but nothing else. No rope, no backpacks, no sign of the other 2 men. The boot wasn't torn or weathered. It looked almost deliberately placed, like someone wanted it found. What's truly unsettling is what happened to the investigation itself. The official police report, originally detailed and extensive, was mysteriously shortened and filed away. Local journalists who tried to follow up on the story reported feeling watched. One reporter claims he received an unmarked letter containing photographs of his own home. He dropped the investigation entirely. In 1979, 2 years after the disappearance, hikers discovered Farquhar's wallet near the same gorge where Lennox's boot was found. Inside was his identification and 30 pounds in cash, completely untouched, as if he'd never left it behind at all. The strangest part came in 1981. A woman visiting the area reported seeing 3 men standing motionless on a hillside in the distance. They were wearing the same clothes described in the original disappearance report. Clothes that hadn't been washed or updated in 4 years. When she hiked toward them to ask if they needed help, they vanished, simply disappeared as she climbed higher. No bodies were ever found. No official conclusion was ever reached. The case remains open, filed away in dusty archives, forgotten by everyone except those who knew these men. The Highlands kept their secret. If this kept you up at night, subscribe. We have plenty more.